I designed and built my own 15-foot aerial silks rig, and here's how I did it. I did a lot of planning for this project, which means I have this beautiful 3D model I get to show you. The whole thing is structured around this 5-foot beam. The legs telescope in like this, and will lock in place using a pin in this hole right here. The same goes for every subsequent 6-foot leg. And as for all the little structural bits, those all fit together like this, forming a really solid frame for the silk to hang from. And that's about all there is to it. So let's start plasma cutting and cue the epic music. Here are all the pieces to get me started with the frame. And of course, the big boy 5-foot beam for everything to connect to. It all fits together something like this. But first, I want to deburr this guy. I might be going a little bit overboard with the 1/4-inch wall thickness, but that's better than the rig falling down. Once that was all cleaned up, I got a little ahead of myself and started tack welding the first piece of the top assembly. This 12-inch piece of square stock is what the first set of legs will be telescoping into. The first support piece also gets welded on here. The 3 lightning holes are inspired by the way airplane wings are manufactured. Does it need these holes for weight reduction? No, because it's not an airplane. Leave me alone, they look cool. So here's why I got a little ahead of myself. I forgot to drill the holes in the square stock for the pins you'll see later, so I had to cut off my tack welds and bring the tubing over to the mill to get those holes done. Now that I'm not skipping any steps, I did some more tack welding. I also cut out 4 more support pieces and welded them on. These are a sort of complex angle that took me a while to figure out, and I'm really happy they ended up fitting perfect in the end. Obviously, I could have achieved a similar level of support using simpler methods, but look! Lightning holes!
What? I like holes.
Moving on, since it all seemed to fit together alright, I went ahead and welded full-length beads on every possible side. This thing is gonna be a heavy beast. Now it's time for the legs. No! Not those legs. Get out of here! Get! Gross. So for the actual legs, I cut some more square tubing into 6-foot lengths and started drilling 1/2-inch holes in them. Next, I cut some 1-foot lengths of some smaller square tubing. And this stuff was super greasy, so I cleaned them off with a sanding disc to get them ready to weld. You can see here how the smaller material sort of telescopes into the larger legs, and these holes allow for what are called rosette welds, or plug welds, to hold it in place. I made a really simple welding jig to repeatedly have 6 inches of the 12-inch stock sticking out, and then later you'll see how the full assembly goes together. The way I do my plug welds is pretty simple. I just tack the material in 2 places, and then try and fill the hole in as solid as I can, trying to penetrate the lower material. I'm not worried about over-welding because I'm just gonna grind it off later. You may notice that 4 of the legs are a little shorter than the rest. No, they're not inadequate. I just ran out of material to make them full length. Since the legs were all structurally there, I decided to do a little proof of concept and set up just the first set. And it works. In the words of my dear father, I'm a grinder, not a welder. And many carcinogenic particles later, the legs are looking a lot smoother. Worth it. Next up, the legs need some more holes to pin them together. These are spaced 2 inches from either end of the larger square tubing. The lower legs don't need holes on the bottom because they will have foot pads attached to them later. And now we are moving back to the big chungus. I really should have thought of this earlier, but I need to drill a 3/4 inch hole for the eye bolt that will actually attach to the silk's rigging. I wanted to use the mill for both sides, but wouldn't you know it, ratchet straps do not work well for fixturing giant pieces of material. Who would have guessed? So for the top hole, I had to use a bad for bad ideas and big ass drill. I've been spoiled by automation. I hate drilling by hand. Good news is, the bottom part I can do with CNC with this ridiculous looking fixture right here. Once those holes were painfully completed, I cut out a simple washer to reinforce the top hole, and then finally I could drop that eye bolt in. And then, for some more beautification, I grinded down some of the more protruding welds on the rig. And then finally, the big eye bolt can get tightened down. You can see this is just before I welded that washer on. And now we get to assemble it! Woo! That's some nice telescoping action. The pins you see here are actually just some 2-inch trailer pins I got off Amazon. They're not really structural, but they keep the rig from coming apart when it's at weird angles. It's definitely a heavy, awkward 2-person job, but it all came together without any issues. In the spirit of my hatred for complex angles, I taped a Sharpie to a dolly. Yeah. But seriously, the dolly let me mark out the angle that the bottom legs need to be so the foot pads would sit flat on the ground. Then those can be taken back down to the shop and cut at that weird angle. Once those are cut down, it's time for just a touch more plasma cutting to make the foot pads. They go on something like this. And look, they're green glove approved. So those get welded on, and I swear, this is the last shot you'll see of me welding. I promise. I also added an anchor point for a guide wire to be run through. And for that guide wire, it's not exactly a guide wire, you'll see. I picked up some rubberized cable and stripped it back and made a loop on both ends. This can then be attached to the legs and tightened just a bit to keep the legs from pushing outward. The same effect could also be accomplished by just staking down all those legs. And the last piece of testing to do is to monkey up there and put a silk on. Wait a second, I can't show you the finished product just yet. We gotta get this thing powder coated. So that's how I made my own silks rig. Thank you so much for watching, and I definitely do not recommend making one of these unless you absolutely know what you're doing. Go buy them. Trust me, the amount of time you'll spend trying to make one of these is so much higher than the price is worth. Anyways, if you feel I've earned it, why not hit that subscribe button? Thanks!